most of us who went into technology went into tech to try to build a more beautiful future. And one of the sad parts is that the promises of the beautiful future, the reason we got into the field, gave way to a much more troubled picture. And at the Center for Humane Technology, we try to look at why exactly, like what are the causes of why it is that the beautiful promises that our tech doesn't live up to them? Why is it that on driving that road to the future, we end up crashing the car into a ditch by the side of the road or another? The internet promised that by giving everyone access to information, it was going to produce the most literate, nuanced, and well informed society on earth. Social media promised that by connecting us all to each other and to our interests, we would have a rich, deep social fabric and deep, more meaningful connection. And of course, I just heard literacy rates are falling for some of the first time in 40 years. And of course, loneliness is an epidemic right now. And in all of these cases, these simple dogmas of what we were building didn't suffice. And when you ask ourselves why, we go back to the quote from Charlie Munger, which is, "You show me the incentives, and I'll show you the outcome." We produced really perverse incentives, both economic incentives and social incentives. And we're living now in the outcomes from those incentives. And the consequences have been the most polarized, distracted societies, with democracy and our markets, both collective sense-making systems, unable to keep up. And now we find ourselves at the brink of a much harder problem, which is AI, set to transform our whole society. And the question is, what are the incentives that we want? How do we incentivize the beautiful future that we all want to build? So that's what this panel is about. Joining me on this panel is Tristan Harris, co-founder of Center for Humane Technology, Max Tegmark, professor at MIT and the Future of Life Institute, Rebecca Winthrop, senior fellow and the director of the Center for Universal Education at Brookings, Michael Gelchi, the global CEO of the Louis Dreyfus Company, and Maria Manilovich, executive director of Safe Online. So, I guess the first question we should ask, although we want to spend most of our time on how do we build that beautiful future, is kind of how do we get here? Tristan, you talk a lot about the race to roll out. Do you want to explain some of the incentives that are happening right now?
Sure. So, I'm sorry for some of you who've come to many panels here, just to rehash a couple basic facts so we're all orienting from the same facts. 2007, 2008, 2009, my friends at Stanford from computer science school, we were the same year, they started Instagram. They were the first employees at places like Facebook and Twitter. I say that because I saw how good people with optimistic visions of a technology could end up creating something that would be very different than the positive world that they were envisioning. And the reason for that difference, as Daniel said, was the incentives. I also watched as it was hard for them to even admit those incentives existed. Because if you built Instagram, you really did want people to just share photos of your life with your friends and have those 20 people that you kind of get to see a little portal into their life. That's what the initial sort of product was about. But as you push that competition for that incentive, which was the race for engagement, the race for attention, the race to the bottom of the brainstem, the race to frequent usage, therefore creating the influencer economy, millions of followers, broadcasting, auto-playing videos, doom scroll, brain rot, that competition pushed it into this regime that really created a devastating societal catastrophe that was completely both predictable and avoidable if we had been clear about how those incentives would lead to those outcomes. And so we have a chance and a choice now. Obviously, we're deep into it already, but to be honest about what are the incentives that are guiding this AI race. And you might say, well, hold on, okay, so what is the incentive? I actually remember talking to one of the OpenAI co-founders about, what do you mean the incentive? Like, our business model isn't attention and engagement. Well, the problem is that you have to start by asking what AI is. What is intelligence? Intelligence, we say that AI arms every other arms race. AI supercharges every other incentive, every other competition. So if there's an incentive for racing for attention, you're going to get AI arms races to accelerate that arms race. You're going to get AI companions hacking human attachment. You're going to get deepfake slop apps where you scroll and it's just super powerful, engaging deepfakes of Meta and Sora vibes. You're also going to get AI arming the arms race of military competition. If I don't adopt AI maximally in my military, I'm going to lose to the other one who will. If I don't adopt between nations, if I don't adopt AI maximally in my economy to boost GDP, because I can't afford you getting a higher GDP than me, I'm going to have to maximally adopt AI throughout my economy. Then you double click that and you go down to businesses. Businesses, if I don't adopt AI to prove to investors that I'm maximally boosting my productivity to fill my fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, I'm going to lose to the other company that will. So I hope this paints a picture of what this means is that AI incentivizes a race to roll out, a race to get market dominance in everybody using AI as much as possible, as frequently as possible, building as much training data as possible, hiring the best engineers, releasing your next AI model, showing that you're the best, getting the next investor money. You get rewarded not for strengthening democracy, not for helping kids' mental health, not for any of these things. You get rewarded for winning the race to recklessness. And so, in summary, what that leads to as we're setting the table of the problem statement is we're currently releasing the most powerful, inscrutable, uncontrollable technology we've ever invented, faster than we've released any other technology in history, that's already demonstrating many harms from AI companion problems, AI suicides, blackmail, deception. And we're releasing this technology under the maximum incentive to cut corners on safety. So as we enter into this conversation, what would it look like to change that fundamental incentive so we don't end up in the reckless world that we're currently barreling towards?
So part of what I love about this panel is the breadth of it. And you're going to hear throughout this panel all these different perspectives on the incentives. And I want to go from the big picture to the on the ground. Rebecca, you've actually just released a pre-mortem of AI in education, tackling like what are the incentives and what is happening right now in pulling education very quickly often into the classroom. Can you tell us about what you found? Yeah.
You bet. So we just did, I'm at the Brookings Institution, and we just did a big global exercise. Uh, I chaired the Brookings Global Task Force on AI in Education, really trying to make sure we don't have the same movie we did with social media. Exactly what you said, Tristan, because we know how children learn, we know how they develop, and we have a lot of evidence around how technology rolls out in education from past experiences. So the idea was to say, are we on the right track? And we looked at the risks, we looked at the benefits, we looked at how you mitigate risks, how you harness benefits, and we just said, where are we going? And the ultimate picture is no, we are not on the right track. The risks are overshadowing the benefits for students. There are benefits if you use narrow AI. Center for Humane Technology talks about narrow versus wide. So when you hold back the power of generative AI and you overlay something on top of it, and you only use vetted content, like a science textbook or something like that, and you integrate it with teaching and learning, good pedagogical practice, it can be really powerful for multilingual kids, for kids with disabilities, for a range of use cases. Um, However, that's really not how most children are interfacing with generative AI for all the incentive reasons that Tristan talked about. Most young people are accessing generative AI when they live in communities with, technology and broadband. Out, Outside of school, or even possibly in school, direct sort of interfacing with frontier model chatbots. And what they're doing is hacking their thinking. So they might be skipping a few steps in their homework, and if one student does that once and that's it, they'll be fine. The problem is they're doing it repeatedly, and if you skip a few steps in your homework, it's it's not just that you somehow took a shortcut. It's that you're not developing your independent thinking skills.
Well, and even worse than that, what I've heard, and I'm curious about how true this is that students, it's a bit like bicycle doping, is that students feel like, well, if I don't use the AI to cheat on my essay, then I'm going to lose to the student next to me who will. Can you talk about some of the incentives
Yep.
of being a student?
Yeah. So the Let me flesh out just a little bit. So it's so we had a very dynamic panel here earlier arguing, is it cognitive offloading, is it cognitive atrophy, and I'm arguing for cognitive stunting. Like nutrition, there's the stunting in the medical world. You don't get enough nutrients when you're a child. I mean, children have very specific developmental needs, and it's sort of the intellectual version of that. If you don't get enough sort of thinking practice, you're cognitively stunting yourself. And we're seeing early evidence of that. And we think that's where this is going to lead if we don't intervene. And there's also a social dynamic. We know that young people are not little mini cognitive processing machines. That's not what they are. They're human beings, and human beings learn through relationships. We have evolved to do that. So any sort of impact on social emotional well-being of a young person affects their cognitive development. Now, to your question, Daniel, about trust, one of the big downsides we found was a really worrisome, it was actually one of my most worrisome risks is the trust piece. A real degrading of trust in the entire educational process. So teachers don't trust kids to, are they actually doing their work, and is it plagiarism? And if you're a teacher, you can't teach someone if you don't know what they got wrong. The entire point of teaching is to say, hey, give feedback. And then students are saying, well, did you actually grade my lesson, teacher? Are you even reading mine? And can't tell you how many kids we interviewed said, well, that teacher, that was a total AI lesson. It was a stupid lesson. That was an AI lesson. So students are not trusting teachers. And then educators are beginning to, and school leaders are beginning to not trust content, because they say, I spent years trying to develop curriculum and get it approved and get it in my classrooms. And all of a sudden AI shows up and I don't know what shows up, what's coming in. And so I'm going back to primary sources.
Yeah, and so the ambiguity itself is this major
Yeah.
problem. I want to pause here just for
Yes,
1
go
second and
ahead.
say, okay, so Max, so now we're seeing how some of the incentives are playing locally and how it's rolling out into schools. Max, you're actually worried about way farther out, right? This is what happens at this natural endpoint of AGI. Can you talk about some of the incentives, big picture incentives for developing?
Yeah, so let's zoom out to the big picture.
Microphone.
Thanks. Let's zoom out to the big picture where Tristan left off and go even bigger. You know, during the history of our human species, incentives have made a huge difference for how much we can flourish, right? So evolution itself, first of all, endowed us with some biological incentives. Pretty much any human on Earth who walks along and finds a baby on the ground is going to pick up the baby and help it, right? We also invented quite early on some social incentives to combat cheating, lying, freeloading. We invented gossip. So there was suddenly an incentive for people to not do these things because it would harm them personally if they did things that were bad for the group. But as societies grew and people ended up spending a lot of time meeting strangers they had never met before, that wasn't enough. So we invented the most powerful incentive structure we've invented so far, the legal system. If someone gets angry at someone in a bar and feels like stabbing the other person, they remember the wait, if I do that, that's probably not worth it. So if you look, show me the incentives, I'll tell you the outcome. You know, look at industries, biology, for example, biotech used to be a free for all. People could sell anything and call it a medicine, and then the company launched thalidomide, this drug that was supposed to reduce nausea in pregnant women. Over 100,000 American babies were born without arms or legs, and at that point, there was enough anger in society that people said, okay, let's do clinical trials, put safety standards in. So before you can sell this medicine, it has to check, demonstrate that the benefits outweigh the harms. So this has been picked up in basically almost every single industry, from restaurants to aircraft to cars, etc. And now, there is one industry right now that makes powerful stuff which is different from all the other ones in that it has no safety standards. Anyone want to guess which one? AI. Yeah, so let's imagine that someone wants to open a new restaurant here in Davos, or actually let's make it New York, and they're going to sell, it's a cafe, they're going to sell some sandwiches. The health inspector comes in and says, I found 53 rats in your kitchen. sorry, you can't sell anything yet. And the cafe owner is like, don't worry, I'm actually not planning on selling any sandwiches at all. All I'm going to do is release an AI girlfriend for 12-year-olds. You know, and I know there have been some issues with this causing suicide, you know, when it's done by other companies, but mine is better. I have a good feeling. The poor guy from the government is going to have to just say, okay, fine, because that's completely legal. And coming back to your question about superintelligence, most of the big cutting edge AI companies now explicitly say that their goal is to build superintelligence, which means an AI that can do every single job better than humans. They want a future where we're effectively building a new species of robots that's just, not just more agile and nimble than us, but smarter than us. And even though it's well accepted in academia that we have no idea how we would even stay in control of Earth if we have a new smarter species. You know, just go down to the zoo and ask what species tends to be in the cages. It's not us, because we're the smartest ones, and intelligence gives power. So once one has safety standards in an industry, biotech or restaurants, one can have a lot of discussions about, should we tweak them a little bit? Should we have more rigorous clinical trials for this or less for that? But you can't play that game when you haven't even gotten in on the playing field and have no standards at all. So I think the most urgent thing we need to do here is just stop the corporate welfare towards AI companies, start treating them like any other industry, put some safety standards in place. The first one I would push for is child safety standards. And then we have the luxury to get into these more refined questions about exactly what the standard should be. But first, yeah, it's a super easy thing. We've done this with all the other industries. Let's do it with AI as well.
And Maria, you want to come in there, and I think it's interesting because you're in charge of a $100 million investment portfolio. So tell us about that.
Can I first of all just bring us back to, I think the critical question here is, why do kids matter for AI companies? Like, what is it about kids that makes it so appealing for AI companies to roll out their products to them? It is at the core of these models is an extractive approach to building technology, right? And kids are the early adopters, and kids are the growing population, and they will be the first one who use it. So the more your product is appealing to a child, the better your model will be down the line, because there will be more and more users. So I think with that in mind, let's go back. I mean, Max and I always argue about this. I'm the more pessimistic of one because I'm from Balkans as well. But the thing is that I was at most of the sessions at the forum on AI, and you go there and you hear, Joe Kaplan and Argentina's minister for deregulation speak about how we should never regulate anything. You should just roll it out, see how it goes, and then if there are some harms, then you correct over the time. But it didn't mention what is the threshold for the harms. What types of harms are you observing? Are you thinking about mental health? Are you thinking only about sexual abuse? Are you thinking? So there is none of those mentions. But the discourse at the forum on the main stages was deregulate. Let us do whatever we want. There was a conversation about, from U.S. side, please change the copyright laws so we can have more access to more data so we can train more. Then you go to the other stage. There is NVIDIA CEO who says, actually, there is no bubble. Bubble doesn't exist. We need to invest more infrastructure and build and build and build. So the scary part is that the main conversations about safety, ethics, like the one that Max had this morning, were happening on the margins and were just like decorative add-ons, but not really the core conversations that you were supposed to have. At Safe Online, we are really trying to build so we go and we raise the funding and we try to build the field. And what we are doing is we are trying to equip the people who need to do the work to create these incentive structures, to have the ammunition for that. Because currently, when we started working 10 years ago, there was no data on what kids are experiencing online. Like literally, we went across the world to invest in solutions, but we were like, what are we even investing in? Like, what do you need to build? There was no data. So investing in research, technology tools, taking that initial risk is the role that philanthropy and collaborative funding vehicles need to play for us to be actually able to have organizations like yours, people who are here working with us, to actually bear that initial burden of the evidence we need to have to actually start changing the incentive structures. But I'll keep it at that.
That's great. So Michael, apropos of that, in the large corporate world, you sit in the game of incentives and creating the right incentives to make sure that you're getting large numbers of people to do the right things. What is the role that that big corporates play in
Sure,
that.
sure. Well, thank you, thank you. And hello, everybody. Maybe just stepping back and introducing Louis Dreyfus Company. So we're a 175-year-old private company. We essentially move approximately 100 million tons of agricultural commodities per year. We're based in over 100 different countries. And we feed and clothe approximately 500 million people annually. When I think about our organization, I have been with Louis Dreyfus for over 35 years, and so the progression of that, and not only am I global CEO, but I'm a husband and a father to the three girls that have experienced the evolution of AI firsthand, right? I try to think about this from different perspectives. Clearly, from a corporate standpoint, look, there are efficiency gains, but what I would say to you there is that from Louis Dreyfus's existence 175 years ago, we have always been trying to find ways to innovate, digitalize, and improve those economic efficiencies. In that way, we continue to have grown our workforce. Right, we're over 20,000 people worldwide right now. Does AI does it create incentive to reduce a workforce? Maybe. We're in the early stages of that right now. What I would say is that we've rolled out approximately 3,000 co-pilots worldwide at this point, just to try to understand what that is and to essentially be part of that conversation.
Can I put a finer point on it? I'm sure, like all CEOs right now, you're experiencing the hair on fire. I'm sure 10 people a week come up to you and say, we need to integrate AI right now, because that's kind of the moment that we're in, right? And how do you respond to that? And what does it mean to be a wise CEO in that pressure?
So look, I mean, we essentially are attempting to enable it, right? We adopt what we call a responsible AI committee, i.e., it has to help a human outcome. So we don't allow AI to fully operate within its own structure, right? An agentic AI system that'll simply go off doing its own thing. We're very concerned globally about the dilution of skills, right? Essentially, you think about these AI structures, beginning to get smarter and smarter, and ultimately, within 5, 7, 10 years' time, you have human beings that are so dilutive that they essentially have to be completely retrained. So, from our standpoint, we try to create that connectivity. Corporately, also, we recognize the responsibilities here from an organizational standpoint. We've established Care Club 1851 to essentially begin to have the conversations about this. We're finding that parents throughout LDC come to work and they say, look, we're concerned about our children, right? And so essentially what we're trying to do organizationally is recognize that we need to compete corporately, but also attempt to escalate the social responsibilities of the corporation itself.
Point of process for a second. I think these things are the most fun when it feels really live. So please don't look to me for permission here. Like, interrupt each other and follow what's live. I guess I'm curious where the rubber meets the road, because we are in such early days and people are experimenting and putting it. But Max, you and Tristan are kind of seeing where the train track goes and both saying, like, there's massive existential danger. What's the middle of that? Like, where does that flip from, okay, our business needs to institute it, to we all need to stop doing this?
I think it is. I'm starting to see a very interesting flip in the last 3 months, actually. So if we can try to counter the Balkan pessimism with some Scandinavian optimism here, this issue of, in particular, kid suicides has been so incredibly powerful. Nobody can listen to someone like Megan Garcia for 10 minutes talking about what happened to her son without just getting so filled with outrage and saying we need to do something about it. That there's something that's happened now I've never seen before. There was a poll a few months ago showing that 95% of all Democrats and Republicans in America are not okay with this unregulated race forward that can harm our children, and even super intelligence and stuff. And I thought to myself, can I think of any other issue at all where 95% of Democrats and Republicans agree? I could not. And you can put names to it also. I call this growing coalition to do something about this the Bernie to Bannon coalition, the B2B coalition. And everybody in between as well. There's this incredible number now of governors, from the governors of Utah, Governor Cox, Governor DeSantis in Florida, very staunch Republicans, to a lot of blue state governors, and saying we need to do stuff. We have 131 AI laws now already suddenly passed in American states. The federal government has tried to push against that because of some tech lobby influence, but they have not succeeded. There are 2 attempts now to ban states from regulating AI, have both gone down in flames in Washington D.C. And even that this Trump executive order has a giant loophole written into it that doesn't apply to child safety. So my optimistic view is that this year we're actually going to get some safety standards, like I was advocating for, at least for child safety, and that will be the thing that breaks this taboo against regulating AI. And pretty soon, a lot of other common sense regulation happens too. In other words, to summarize, I think these great tragedies have befallen so many families who have lost their children is the thalidomide moment for AI. And we should be very bold when we push for what to do in response, not settle for some company saying, "Oh, fine, we're going to put some voluntary age limits on our AI girlfriend bot and pinky promise," but really insist on the one incentive that makes a massive difference, which is binding safety standards, AI clinical trials, treat AI like any other industry. And I'm optimistic we can do this. Sorry to be so cheerful.
So if children are the catalyst, then for everybody, so what are the levers? How do we actually shift those incentives? What are the things we should do?
One of the things, just to build on Max, because I agree, I actually think that we're in a very different place than we were when social media rolled out, where teachers were not at the table, parents were not at the table, like social workers, caregivers, people who work with kids, were not thinking about social media, and weren't there, weren't advocating, weren't asking how, what's going on. Schools weren't teaching about it, like what is this, how does it work, what are the incentives behind it. So I think that's positive, and I think that's why you're seeing such action. And I actually think it's parent driven, and the wonderful people in this room who have invested in those movements have a lot, we all have a lot of debt to them. So the thing I worry about working in education is I think we'll get there with child safety. I am really worried. I'm not, yeah, I'm worried. I'm like, should I be positive? No, I'm worried. I'm really worried. I worry that is not far enough. And I worry, certainly from in an education setting, this idea of cognitive atrophy, cognitive decline, eroding social relationships, it is serious. It is serious, and we have to do something about it. And I think that in terms of incentives, one of the things that here we are at Davos that we really need to talk about is sort of new measures for investors, at least in technology that applies to education. One of the interviews we had, again in this large study, was with a CEO who runs a very large inclusive education technology company. And he said, I have this great product. It's for the adults in the system. It's not for kids. It's for teachers to help develop individualized education plans, which in the United States are for kids with disabilities. And the teachers love it. They introduced AI, and it's cut their time in half. They only have to spend half as long as they did to make individualized education plans. I presented it to my board, and he said I got hammered. They were so pissed because usage time of the platform had gone down. And so it's highly effective in terms of impact in the educator, in the classroom, et cetera. But the investor measures is how long they're using the product. So it's really weird. So we need very different investment incentives.
Did you wanna- No, I just wanted to quickly build on that because one of the things that I um, deeply am devoted to right now is not making safety by design the ceiling, right? Like, because safety by design should be like the very basic initial step that you need to go through to get to a place to even market your product. Like, and now currently we are making such a huge fuss about like, yay, safety by design. I'm like, where is the well-being in this discussion? Like, where do you get to a point where you actually think about children as any other product, that not only you're not supposed to harm them, you're actually supposed to prove that you're doing something beneficial for them with your product, and we are not there yet. And where the biggest, I think, where I would want to contribute the most to the incentive structure is, can we start creating the foundations and the baselines for the data and the research we need to have, so we are not 20 years from now in a situation we were with social media. We were saying we can't really anticipate anything. Now we more or less have hypotheses of what this impact will be. Let's now start creating those scientific foundations and measurement frameworks, so we can, when Demis Hassabis says that he's not worried about what did he say? He's not worried about job markets. He's not worried about energy markets. He's worried about the meaning and the purpose of humans in the age of AI. And then the question we wanted to ask him was like, so are you monitoring the changes, or like, do you have a framework for mental health impacts of your AI products? And are you already putting some? No, they're not. So like, we don't currently even have that. So in order to change incentive structure, we need to have accountability mechanism that we can build right now to hold them accountable to the changes we want to see, I
And
guess.
I'm so glad you
This
said
is so good. If I can just super quickly chime in and say, it's looking at the benefits, of course, is so crucial. And I just want to remind everybody that if someone, Novartis from nearby here, decides to launch a new blood pressure lowering drug, against hypertension, and they go to the FDA for approval of their clinical trial, and they've demonstrated it doesn't cause any harm, but they're going to get rejected. The FDA is going to be like, well, where's the benefit? You have to demonstrate benefit also.
Maybe I'll just add in here. So totally agree. In the social media conversation, I've watched how a decade of the conversation is, well, how can we just reduce the harm? Maybe the screen time, if it was just 5% less, then that would be a better world. Or maybe if we just got rid of the toxic content, so there's no fentanyl or, drug ads for kids on Snapchat. But that minimizes the collective problem. We're in a house right now called Human Change. Margarita is hosting us. Human change is about the climate change of culture, the climate change of what it means to be human. We're not just about, the risk is not just losing humanity, but losing our humanity, as Zach Stein said earlier today. There's a comprehensive set of things that all week we've been here talking about. Shortening attention spans, kids who don't have socialization. Yes, at the extreme end, teen suicides from AI companions, attachment hacking, centralization of power. But there's a whole range of these issues. And what's hard is, I think, just speaking honestly, I think when you, as a public communicator about these topics, what I notice is when you show people the full range of harm, it's actually just overwhelming. And I understand that. But I think that we need to be able to be clear that the current incentives for all these companies racing to create all the consequences we just mentioned creates this collective bad outcome. That we need to have global moral clarity is unacceptable. It's unacceptable for businesses because they don't have an entry-level workforce, because they've all been degraded by the whole machine that has made them not very good at socializing, not very good worker skills, can't focus their attention. It's not good for businesses because they're all many businesses have parents who work at them, and they don't want their kids to be affected by this stuff. And so
maybe if I could jump
yeah,
in
go ahead.
there, right, because thank you for that. Look, I think you brought up two very important points: parents, and then just more important. I just wanted to touch back on the financial incentives. The entire system is driven based on financial incentives, right? You come up with an idea, you raise capital, you value yourselves at 10x, 100x of that, and you essentially create this valuation of an enterprise. That's the business model right now. But within that too, there has to be a discussion, as you say, about non-financial KPIs that basically account for social responsibility, right? Within that structure, right? And so there's a way to align that. right? I mean, in our organization as well, we talk about social related issues, right? You know, what type of leadership structure do we want? Let's establish a KPI and let's incentivize the management to achieve that. What type of environmental outcome do we want? Let's do that as well. And so it absolutely can be done, right? But the shareholders of those enterprises have to insist that those organizations be held accountable for non-financial KPIs, right? And incentive.
But then it's also a question of like the legislation that we are currently working towards, the regulation. We are looking at something we were supposed to regulate 20 years ago, but we are not looking forward. Where I'm worried is that we are only now regulating access to social media, but then that doesn't at all touch ChatGPT. Like kids can now migrate in Australia to ChatGPT, no problem.
And I'm sorry, this has been super important to both of us just because 2025 Vantage, we can finally talk about all the harms that we began to incur in like 2015. And people are now so excited to talk about those harms because they have the language to talk about it finally, and that's great. But what we need to do is to build the language to talk about the things that we're now incurring. So please.
No, but there is also like I mean, my child is 5 years old, and I am thinking about okay, in 10 years she won't know what Meta was or like Instagram. Like she literally will not even understand what I'm talking about. But AI will come to them through non-screens, like through little conversational robots. Like robotics is going to skyrocket this, and we are not like the regulation conversation is not happening at that scale. Like it is not going towards those type of things that we need to kind of start thinking about now. We are still in the social media era, and again, we just need to be much more purposeful in how we move to that trajectory.
The problem is that regulation may not happen for another 10 years. Just let's be fair.
Don't
right?
say that,
You know,
Mike.
look, I mean,
Come on.
if you're pragmatic, right? But if you reflect on what can you do within your spheres of influence, right? There are things that we can do individually, right? There are things that we could do corporately, and there are also things that we could do within our ecosystem to align with others who have very ascribed values, right? And so that those are where the conversations need to begin, explaining what we're doing, right, to other colleagues, right? We may not have the answer, right, but at least we're beginning to have the conversation.
Mike, just to jump in on that.
Sure.
I really, really hope we have regulation, and we should hold that in our mind and go for it. But you have a very good point, which is we don't have to sit and wait and pray while others are working on it. You know, again, in doing this big premortem, and the entire reason we did a premortem to say, okay, well, are we heading in the right direction or not? And it's a premortem. It's early. This is not a conventional research project. We did a year, we did it fast, we did a snapshot, we triangulated all the data we could find. And it's like, yeah, the signals are pretty much not going in the right direction. Why did we do it? So we could shift and bend the arc. And there are things we can do, immediately. So in the education sector, educators, school leaders, school district leaders, ministers of education, teacher training institutes, parents, everybody who's in the education ecosystem can on Monday, when we all leave Davos and fly back, decide, our goal is to have an education system that is the most human as possible for the 7 hours a day kids are in school, for the 40 weeks a year, that it is the vast chunk of it is human to human interaction. I don't think all of it. I do think we need to help kids understand and learn technology. And I think, to your point, to me, that's a really important goal. A screen-free school or like a cell phone ban, bell-to-bell cell phone ban, is really important. But it is not the vision of what we want for our kids. And when we have generative AI that's going to be embedded in our clothes, in our glasses, it doesn't matter if it's a screen-free school. We need human interaction and kids to be able to think for themselves, as well as, of course, learning what these technologies are and understanding how they work so they can
Max
have
is
some
jumping
agency
out of his
over
chair,
them.
so I have to.
Yes.
I just want to put some more optimism into this again, because there are two kinds of incentives, really: reactive and proactive. The reactive kinds are the ones that were just mentioned here. For example, some company does something really bad, and then they get sued later, and blah blah, or there's a broad public outcry once people have the language to talk about it, and 10 years later there are some laws. It's all reaction. It's playing whack-a-mole. something happens, and then later you deal with it, and something else pops up. But the way we do it in pharma, for example, with just binding safety standards, is actually proactive, because what the whole clinical trial system does is, it's not the job of the government to predict what harms are going to come or figure out whether something is safe or not. It's always the company's responsibility. They have to do the clinical trial. They have to make the safety case. If they develop some whole new kind of medicine that no one in the government had thought might even exist when the law was written, it's the government's problem to do some testing and see if it is safe or not. So by having these safety standards, right, things don't even get released in the first place until they have been demonstrated to have benefits. That way the harms. And that's why I think this is a much more future-proof approach to things. And those are the biggest kinds of victories we should try to win. And it's very doable to win them, because we have won that battle with basically every other industry. And
But so what do we say though to people who might be listening to this, to saying, I like the feel good, I like that success begets success, I like that there's things we have to do, but we aren't being hard-headed enough somehow about the big incentives, the geopolitical incentives. People who say we just have to win this race, we're going to be left behind, or we're going to be invaded by people who do this, or your company is going to lose out to other companies who do this. What do you say to that?
Yeah, like the way for America to get ahead of China is to have more American kids committing suicide. I mean, this is the dumbest argument I've ever heard in my entire life. And the fact of the matter is, why did we succeed with all these other industries? Why is it, for example, that the Chinese government has their own FDA and regulate their drugs? Is it because America somehow pushed them to do it and made them promise? And no, it was in their own self-interest, of course. Just in the self-interest of the Chinese government, the Chinese kids don't commit suicide. They just passed a law in China banning anthropomorphic AI, not to do America a favor, but to protect the Chinese youth. And so I see the optimistic future being that it all starts locally. Individual countries do these things to protect their own children and more generally their own well-being. And then once that's happened, that's when the international part comes. The Chinese FDA, the US FDA, and the EMA in Europe get together for drinks and so on, and say, maybe we can harmonize our standards a little bit so it's easier for companies to get licensed in one country and then sell in the other, and share best practices. This will happen organically. We
Okay.
have to start locally.
Right.
So I believe that at the governmental level. Michael, tell us about the corporate level.
Look, I mean, just maybe just responding to that, to your point, there's an existential race between China and the United States, in effect, on this, right? Where the fear factor by both sides, or that one or the other will win this, right? And notwithstanding your point on China, they. Their TikTok looks different than the U.S. version. The anamorphic illegality there, as opposed to this here. So and look, just even if you think about regulation in the United States, we regulate speed, right? There's a federal speed limit, to be fair, right? So it's not to say that it will not happen, right? Especially as it relates to children. But I think you have this real neuroticism at the federal level in relation to losing that race, right? And I think that's actually defining the context of some levels of regulation at this point. At the corporate level, as I said, I think what we have to do is we have to regulate ourselves. We have to reflect our own corporate accountability in terms of what that means. Responsible AI, how we want to reflect that. Unhealthy employees and new entrants into the job market that are incapable of understanding the general principles of business are problematic, right? For every corporate, and so we need to continue to engage in that discussion in order to improve those outcomes.
So wait, I have a question, Mike. You are an ethical leader and very values oriented. How do you ensure that other CEOs regulate themselves? Is it peer pressure? Is it attracting employees? Is it retention? What is it?
It's a loaded question. Let me maybe start by saying when I was appointed CEO, we had some criteria that we needed to discuss within the organization. For example, even with an organization, we were losing employees regularly. There was a high turnover rate, right? So we had to discuss why is that happening. You had to dissect the granularity as to what was the value proposition, the employee value proposition that Louis Dreyfus was not providing to its employees. And essentially what we determined in the nutshell was that it was that human connectivity. The management was not giving the communicative incentives in order to value the employees within the organization. So they felt it felt hollow. They left the organization. Right?
And I know you're waiting to get in, Maria, but
and-
I just want to put one more.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you one final question about this. So, Ethan Mollick, professor at Wharton, coined a term called secret cyborg, which is that employees at most companies are all using AI, but afraid to say that they're using AI. So there's no formal corporate policy, but everyone's using it because they're afraid that if they don't, X, Y, Z, follow that incentive. I appreciate the retention benefits, and I appreciate the sort of the human culture benefits, but you're also one of the largest ag hedgers in the world, amongst all the other things that Louis Dreyfus does. You're in a zero-sum market dynamic. You have to stay ahead. How are you even thinking about the risk-benefit there? Because you must have a bunch of people inside your company that are saying, full steam ahead, let's...
Sure, and we absolutely do, and we're going full steam ahead with a human a human touch on the controls, right? We have not succumbed to simply allowing generative AI to run trading models, right? And so, because again, the hallucination effect of what can come out of there can be catastrophic to our business. And it's not to say that things will not get to that point, right? But at this juncture, we have to ensure that we have humans in the pilot seat. That's why it's called co-pilot, right? In a sense, right?
I do want to go back to geopolitics and the big question, because I think that's where a lot of us are still struggling with. And I have two ideas to be optimistic, max optimistic for once. So one is what we have learned, and I can tell you so much, so if you want to talk about it later, come to me, the failings around the encryption debate and child online safety and privacy was that we failed to be specific about what we meant and go into the technicalities of issue. The thing that we were saying was encryption is bad, and we can't say that about technology. AI is not bad inherently in itself. Right. But being very specific about what we are talking about, if we want to have low-hanging fruits, banning general purpose, conversational, anthropomorphic AI for kids is a good way to start as a coalition of people. So be very specific what we are for and against, and then be technical about that and be very clear about the definitions. The second thing that we never mention in any of the rooms is the power of the global south. Nobody speaks about countries other than US, Australia, UK, and others. We are seeing power in negotiating and bargaining in blocks of countries. If you support now Africa, Southeast Asia, and other places to start developing frameworks that can help us get to a place, then you're changing the dynamic of geopolitical powers. At the same time, finding a way to actually regulate access to data, which now companies are going towards. All of the programs that I've seen in Africa now in education have AI at the center of it. And it's very scary because the main narrative there is schools with no teachers, hospitals with no doctors. And it's a huge yay, a very, very huge positive yay. And it's scaring me so much because kids there are at the greatest risk. And we don't talk enough about what kids there experience when there's huge optimism there because just there's hunger for change.
And Rebecca, you look at global education, so tell us that.
I mean, we did find robot teachers in India in our study, at least in 2 schools. They're working with a human teacher, and the schools were very proud and very happy. And they were assisting the human teacher because in India you have incredibly large class sizes, like 100 kids to a classroom. It's virtually impossible. So I just put that in all of our minds to say, this isn't some future thing. It's happening on the margins. We'll see what happens. But there is definitely an interest, at least some national education leaders I spoke to said, oh, there's a huge teacher shortage in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. At least one said, do I need to hire any more teachers now that AI has come? So it's out there. It's real. Now, what I have seen is that I actually think the Global South, who's been left out of a lot of this, might have a silver lining. Like I'm actually think the equity of how we normally think about equity globally is kids with technology who are racing forward and then kids without technology at the bottom. I think it's actually switched. I think there's a few small kids, and we found them in the study, who are so motivated and so excited, and it's like 0.011% of kids who use generative AI, and they're in like high school and they're like getting master's degrees. They're like going so fast forward. And then the kids at the bottom are the unmotivated kids who have technology, who are shortcutting their thinking and learning, and that actually the kids without technology, without Gen AI, are doing better than them, and that there is a possible silver lining for them to learn from the early adopter communities and not repeat the same mistakes. Now, there is a lot of interest in Gen AI. Where I have seen is paired with teachers. So, for example, there's some great offline, Gen AI examples of tutoring in a certain subject where the teacher's there, but the teacher didn't really know the subject very well, and the poor teacher is trying to teach, and there's all these kids, and that is a good narrow, very narrow specific use. And so there is good that can come of it if we're really intentional and carefully deploy
So I
it.
hear you and Michael making the same point, which is we can be prudent as institutions and we don't need to shoot ourselves in the foot. In fact, we can see it coming. So we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. We wait until we figure out how to do it. Max, you were going to talk?
Just wanted to add the excellent comments you, Michael, made there about something else that corporations can do. I would say any corporation that is doing things well and has their own standards that they hold themselves to, which are higher than their sloppiest competitors, should go and find like-minded corporations and go encourage their government to take their voluntary standards and turn them into law that are binding on all the more corner-cutting competitors, right? This is directly advantageous financially. No responsible company wants to compete with someone who's undercutting you on safety or in horrible ways, right? And sure enough, I've never met a single biotech CEO who wants to abolish the FDA. They don't want to have to compete with companies that don't do clinical trials. And it's also quite obvious to any responsible company that if some competitor causes a huge disaster, that it's going to cause a backlash against the industry. I mean, nuclear CEOs in the U.S. were devastated by 3 Mile Island and Fukushima and Chernobyl. So those of you who are responsible, please consider also engaging with policymakers to try to turn this into law.
Thank you for that. I think that's why we're here.
Right.
Maria, I just want to make sure we get the investor side of it, because you often hear, especially in the Valley, that VCs are pushing for just the fastest integrated ways, a winner-take-all market. But you have a different thesis about the way that you do investment, right? And so what role do investors have to play in making this go well?
No, that's a very good question. And I always say proudly, but also sadly, Safe Online is the only global fund focusing on child online safety that has really global purview. We look across all the geographies, and that's why we learn a lot. One thing that I also wanted to mention is that there were a lot of gains that we have done on the safety front over the years, but don't just assume that a new update or a software change in US trickles down to Nigeria. The Instagram, teen accounts did not do that in other places. We as a fund think that the most important thing in any new and emerging field is to really take ecosystem view and build a field. Don't think about can one or two kind of fragmented projects make progress. Take the view of what you will need 10 years from now and start collecting funders, like-minded people, leaders around that idea, collect the funding and have that kind of like field building view. And that's what we have done when we started funding 10 years ago. And that's what we are now trying to do with this new initiative called We Wellbeing, which is looking into well-being of children to the age of AI, not only safety, because again, safety is the baseline, well-being is where we want to be. I will say that funding for child online safety and more broadly, the field of digital safety is very thin. there are literally 10 philanthropic funders maximum, and maybe a couple of governments who actually give the funding for this. So it has been an uphill battle to get actually people to think about this in terms of that we want them to think. But the need is enormous. Beyond just us being able to capacitate ourselves to be advocates and fighters that we need to be, I always speak about the current harm is huge. The current need is huge. Capacities in the global south, but also in the global north, do not exist to address the current harms that kids are facing. So again, we do need to make the case and have the data, but principally to be able to make the change. And with that, investing in that kind of layer of what are the key ingredients we need to have 10 years from now to be where we want to be, and now make those investments is going to be critical. That's what we're trying. That is the gap that we are trying as Safe Online to fill.
And we have to go to questions in a minute, but maybe just as a final, I'm glad you said 10 years, because what I was thinking was, in all your comments, I hear 10, 20, 30 years worth of work. But as we come back to the start of the panel, we were saying, but now is this critical moment where we're laying the foundations, right? So if this next year or two is this critical moment, this is a question for all of you. What are the most incredibly urgent things that we need to do now or yesterday? What are the important things we need to make sure we do in the next few years? And what are the things that actually can and should wait, even though we want to do them all right now?
If I can jump in and say the uncomfortable thing. There are people who believe it's actually already too late. If you look at the speed of how fast this is going. I'm not saying that to demotivate us. I'm saying that to have a reality check about how fast this is actually happening. If we were to respond at the adequate speed, it would mean very significantly, very consequentially, and very powerfully. To me, that is a global, powerful movement that has global moral clarity about the current catastrophe that we're heading towards. I think I would sum it up very simply. The current race to AI is the race to replace you economically. All the companies are designing and building to replace all economic labor. Not have you upgrade to another job, but to eventually replace all forms of cognitive labor. To be very clear, they're designing to replace you socially. When Mark Zuckerberg says, we're going to give everybody AI friends, and they're racing to build attachment. They're also racing to replace you politically, so that once you don't have a job, you won't have a voice. Because unlike in the past where we needed your labor or we needed your taxes, now you're what Yuval Harari calls the useless class. Because we don't need your skills anymore. Because GDP is coming from AI, not from people. And so this is actually the final moment before we get to make a radical and dramatic choice about what is adequate to the situation. And I think that throughout the whole week here, we've seen basically a whole suite of people tell you exactly the pieces of what we can do. And I do see a way in which if you had the combination of smartphone-free schools rippling across the world, if you have Australia, Denmark, soon to be France, and many other countries now do social media bans for under 16, if you have a global cultural movement with total clarity that we need, because the time is just too late and smartphones are just too toxic, we just need flip phones and light phones for all kids in all schools right now. It'll stop the bleeding and start to reverse this problem. And we need agreements between the US and China about basically we're currently on track to have mass unemployment in all of these countries, where in the French Revolution, it only took 20% unemployment to get the French Revolution. And we're currently in a competition to essentially nuke our social fabrics for the sake of GDP going up, and then basically be in a competition for who's willing to better manage the radiation cloud of societal disruption as we navigate that. And rather end up in that world where we actually nuke our economies and then manage the radiation cloud to differing degrees, we could actually say, let's not collectively nuke our humanity, children, our attachment, our attention spans, the full suite of things that we need to make happen.
And so, yeah. So pull that down just one level and say, so what does that mean for the next year or two? What would you do?
I mean, it's one of those, it's everything, right? It's like a wartime mobilization effort. It's global culture. It's all the music makers and cultural leaders and song makers. This week we've met with Hollywood folks, people who work with musicians. If we had songs about this that were taking all of these memes and putting it out into culture, if we had a business alliance where, you know, the ES we were talking earlier, if there was an alliance of all businesses who realize they're actually about to neutralize our customer base. We're not gonna have people who are able to buy our products. We could have a business alliance that in ESG, the S stands for society. And businesses could be funding collectively a pool of resources to build that cultural movement. I'll give you an example, the Big Tobacco movement, the Truth Campaign. Everybody remember the Truth Campaign? out of the settlement of big tobacco, there is still $100 million per year that goes into advertising against the negative effects of tobacco. In other words, the collective immune system we're trying to boot up in culture against tobacco, we fund that immune system at the tune of $100 million a year. At the scale of all business agreeing that we currently have a problem, we could be funding a $1 billion a year immune system to the collective catastrophe that we're currently heading towards. And that plus all the policy work that needs to happen and all the AI assurance technology that needs VC funding to back and all of the just, the parents' movements and the lawyers and the litigation that has to happen. And obviously, even with all that, we can't guarantee that it'll be okay. But I think that showing up in solidarity and integrity with the truth of the situation, the truth of the timelines, is the most meaningful way that I think we can all show up in response to that problem.
I mean, in addition to this, fully agree, part of this, count on us. There are a bunch of things we can do right now, because I am also worried about the current harms. So let's take that view of like what needs to happen for us to actually really stop this, to actually really change this. What we are trying to do this year is really start a movement for banning of notification apps. So deepfakes for kids, that's a really huge problem that we are seeing, and like that is something we need to call for now. So in 2 weeks, we're launching this big global call of all the organizations, CSOs working in this space. The second thing is we really need to fight the conversational AIs with kids. Like that needs to really be stopped now, this year. Next year, we need to do something about that. If that is going to be the initial step of the movement or something, I think that is where we need to be to stop the further rollout of the harms, and then take it from there. I think midterm, where the investment needs to be, as I always say, and I really, Mike, I liked your thinking about the outcomes. How do you actually create a KPIs based on outcomes? How can we create the baselines and the research and the science that we need to be able to hold the companies accountable into the future, not only about AI, but of everything that is coming, because we need to have future-proof regulation. And then I think at the end, what was my last one? Well, regulation that is focused on outcomes. That's my first one. That's it.
Thanks.
Agree with all of that. Even though we need to, as you say, do so many different things, it's very important that we don't get so distracted by focusing on all of them at the same time that we forget to actually win. We need to really start winning. And there have been some spectacular wins, like the cell phone ban in New York is just, people didn't think it was possible. Now people are loving it, and it's spreading, and it emboldens the whole movement and gets more people thinking, yeah, maybe we can do stuff. So I think one decisive victory we really have within range this year, not in 10 years, is this business about not just going after a ban on notification specifically, or AI girlfriends or boyfriends specifically, but simply saying that any app, whatever it is, that has a very obvious path to harming kids, needs to undergo an AI clinical trial before it comes out. Very visible, very, very doable. And I was just talking 2 weeks ago with one of the governors in the US who is interested in actually doing a law on this, announcing it, next month, pushing for it. We have a meeting we're organizing with the Future Life Institute in New Orleans next week. If you're interested in this, talk to Ben Cumming over there, where we're bringing together all of the main organizations who care about these things in the US to see, can we coordinate across the political spectrum, et cetera, on picking out, one big battle that we're all going to go in and blitz and fight together. Once we win one big victory, we'll be on a roll, and we can keep going and get through all of the ones that you have all brought up here. But we need to be very focused on something concrete and actionable now.
I want to add to that, because I'm very pragmatic, and that's what we do at Brookings. We're like, oh, big problem. How do you break it down? What do you got to do? And who do you got to reach? And what's your actor of, influence, et cetera, or matrix of influence? So I will just say we have 12 recommendations in our report. It's online. Please go look at it. But from this discussion here, which I definitely agree with, it strikes me that in the next 3 months, we should have some sort of coalition coordination of all of us to be like, okay, what are the couple of big things we're going for? In a couple months, I'm doing a whole thing with, I think, 7 governors and their teams. So we should coordinate, right? And in the next sort of, 6 months, I really think from an education standpoint, something we can do is we can shift how we do teaching and learning. If generative AI can hack your assignment, don't give it. Do a lot more knowledge acquisition and applying that knowledge. That is very hard to hack with AI, and that'll make sure that we keep these learning skills going. And then, of course, I would say, we absolutely have to ban AI companions under the age of 18, which a lot of people are working on, and we need to stick with that. So those would be my 6 month,
Michael,
to
any
3
final
month,
adds?
6 month, 12 month.
Look, I mean, it's tough to go last after all that. Thank you. Look, I mean, I think again, just reflecting on it from a personal standpoint, I agree with practically everything here. Even when we think about our daughters who are not exactly children anymore, it's still, I think, is a situation where we're just at a personal level. You want the best for your children in terms of their own futures. Really, from a corporate standpoint, short term, medium term, long term. Look, as I said, you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. I think we walk that talk organizationally. I think it's really up to us and others to continue to increase that advocacy and try to align with best practices out there. I don't think we have it right today, right? But we're trying to make a difference, right? And we're trying to focus on human connectivity and healthy outcomes, right? And I think that with more stakeholders, shareholders holding that management to account on that, I'm maybe a bit of an optimist in terms of believing that we'll attempt to get better outcomes. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to abuse the moderator position and add one last thing, and then let's go to questions. So the last thing I would say is there's a very unsexy topic, but we've talked about it a lot this week, which is liability. Example I use is compare and contrast self-driving cars. We're not seeing self-driving cars out there, some carnage of hundreds of dead bodies and things in the streets and, undermining children. Why? Because the liability on the road is clear. And because the liability on streets is incredibly clear, all the general counsels of all the self-driving companies are in this responsible position. And they're saying, if you kill 4 people, there goes the company. And so self-driving is going nice and slow and very predictably, and it's going to be a net good for the world. Because we don't have that in generative AI, we're seeing all these harms that don't appear on balance sheets. And so, someone mentioned duty of care earlier. That's a big one because we don't know what all the harms are, but also making sure that there's private rights of action, making sure that people can actually put the harms back on the balance sheets. Suddenly all the general counsels of all the companies will go on a much more slow and careful stance. So that's my one throw in here is clean liability. Okay, so we're going to move to Q&A. The way we're going to do this, we're going to take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then we're just going to have a buffet where you can all pick and choose from that, okay? So I think someone's in the audience. Maria.
So thank you. This was very interesting. And I want to try to put things together. So Tristan, you started talking about incentives and the fact that tech companies do not care about any of their rewards we care about. So it seems like for tech companies, it's not going to be the carrot, it's going to be the stick, the prohibitions will make a difference. But then Rebecca and Mike, you're talking about 2 types of intermediaries, the schools or the companies. And there it seems like basically the reward system, setting a goal of kids flourishing, development, and social connection would work. So could we have a framework built on this distinction?
Great question. Who else has a question? You in the 3rd row?
Yeah, so first off, I agree. Let's solve the collective action problems. Let's not cannibalize our children in the future. On board. Generally, there seems to be consensus of government regulation as the primary lever is the main thing I'm hearing here. And when I look across many of the industries, if I think about healthcare, if I think about housing, those are many of the places where actually people are hurting the most and where the economic growth has done the least good. And I think many sources would point to regulation and regulatory capture as the reason for that. So again, in favor of regulation, in favor of collection action problem solving, in favor of harm reduction, in favor of liability, but how do you do it in a way that doesn't just turn into monopoly capture, rewarding incumbents, making sure that actually the big problems don't get solved and the harms keep going and people just extract rents from them?
Great question. Is government really up to the challenge? Well, let's get one more.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for everything you've been sharing with us, the insights, the passion. One of the meta themes in these last 3 days that I've seen emerge is this idea of consciousness as capital. And I'd say that in this theme of the harms that AI has, all of you on the stage on a scale of 0 to 100 on consciousness, you're probably at 150. So that's great to see. I'd just like to ask a very lighthearted question. Which are the life hacks, maybe one from each of you, that each of you use in your daily life to help reduce the impact of AI or just these harms on yourselves? And if you'd be willing to share some of those, because I think we could take those away with us.
Great. So let's do those three. So Gaia was about unifying the frameworks for addressing these concerns. You were about, is government really up to the challenge? And then there's the other, like, well, what do we actually do on the stage in order to mitigate that for us? Max.
I'll take the regulatory capture question, which is great. I think it's a very serious problem, regulatory capture. Overregulation is also a problem. I would compare this with if you meet some person who's on the verge of starving to death, we know that obesity is a problem. And you might worry, what if I give this guy ultimately too much food and he becomes obese? But he's on the verge of starving to death, so let's start by giving him something. And then we worry about the rest. And similarly, we're in an absolutely catastrophic situation right now with zero regulation. So priority one should be to get some regulation, and then we worry about regulatory capture.
But again, maybe just to take somewhat of the other side of that, you see Europe versus the United States, two very different economic models, and two very different regulatory models. I should say two very different economic outcomes in relation to their capital markets. And so, again, we need to kind of figure out where that balance is. Yes, for regulation. Yes, for regulation for children. Right? How far do you move the dial beyond there to destroy capital and innovation? It's just and I think that's ultimately the tension when regulators need to reflect where is the line. Yeah.
Exactly, but as long as we agree that the correct balance is not zero regulation, then we should get going, and we know we're going at least in the right direction towards whatever the correct place is.
Yes.
I mean, I can take the third question because I agree with the response to the regulatory one. I can see in myself the dependency that I created in using AI chatbots in my everyday work, because the pressure of how much you want to achieve and how the productivity pressures are huge, and you, especially if you work in a non-profit space with a mission, like you really want to do so much more daily. The one thing that I do is I never ask any chatbot any question before I actually chart down what I think about it. So if I want to run something by it, I will say, I would like to put these 3 main points. This is what I'm thinking about. This is how I want to frame something. Can you please send me this? And then it's basically like a manual work of a researcher that somebody would do for you. But like, I just first don't let it think for me. I've also shut down its ability to ask me follow-up questions, because that interrupts my train of thought. So normally it wants to stay engaged with you. Would you like me to do this or that? So like, I've completely shut it down, because that is really, really scary for me. It completely derails me. But I try to really not depend on it, but it's really hard. It's really hard as an adult, let alone a child.
I actually thank you for that. It reminded me of a conversation that my wife has and I had with respect to the AI. When you ask it a question, it'll always more or less tell you how smart you are, right? Which is more or less, look, it's come out with the right answer again, right? Reaffirming what your thought is on. And then I heard yesterday at breakfast you could actually turn that off. And so in fact, I do think the more that we tend to understand about what the possibilities are and how to interact with it, the better the experience will be for the individuals, right?
I want to add on the hacks piece. My phone is always in grayscale. which I have to say makes a big difference. I actually don't spend that much time on my phone. I think it's average 2 hours a day, which is largely text and emails. But it's very easy to get distracted. You're like, it's constantly at you. You're like, oh, what's that? But the grayscale helps. On AI, just to totally reiterate, I use it all the time for research. It's incredible. It like goes in like a little research assistant 24/7 and reads every single website and gives me a literature review. Big portion is not right, but frankly, so is my research assistants. They're straight out of college. You have to check them too. But what I never do is come up with ideas. And people talk about, well, it's great for as a brainstorm partner, and it might be. However, after doing this pre-mortem, one of the things that I'm especially worried about is this idea of if we keep relying on AI, we're all going to have sort of the same ideas. There's about a 6-year study on creativity run by experts out of Georgetown that was part of our research that we looked at. And they've been measuring creativity on seniors, high school seniors, who are writing their essays to get into college. And before ChatGPT came out, they can map the creativity, and it's very diverse. Lots of different ideas, lots of different stories, lots of different things. After ChatGPT came out, the words were a lot more creative, so they had a lot better vocabulary, like a lot more sophisticated ways, all describing the same ideas. And it's this idea of a collective creativity loss, population-wide creativity loss. So don't succumb to, I'm gonna get there, and it's good for feedback. It can give good feedback. Put it in, does it make any sense? Oh, no, you forgot to explain something. Okay, but generating ideas is something I don't rely on it for.
Tristan, any last remarks? Okay. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Now I want to invite up to the stage Margarita Louis-Dreyfus, our gracious host, for some closing remarks.
Yeah, okay, of course, thank you. It's good? Is it? Thank you very much to each of you to come here, to fly from very far and to share with us your incredible knowledge and your ideas. Here, I'm supposed to say closing remarks, but I would like to add something as usual. First, I would like to share with you some information which some of you have said already, but many of you I didn't say. I know one guy, Swiss guy in Zurich. He has a big company, and he had for his company call center in Poland, pretty big one for many years, 250 people. He of course decided to use AI. And since 1 year, he has 25 people and AI. AI answering calls of many of his clients. And the clients, they have choice to choose to speak with AI or to speak with human being. Most of the people choose to speak with AI. And I say this example, for me, honestly, it's not exactly very surprising. We, human beings, we like shortcuts, we like quick solutions. This is our weakness. And this is why also even in Australia, when we hear about this success, we have to remember that what we don't speak, the children there still are sitting behind the screens. Because TikTok is out, maybe Instagram is out, but there are so many others. Simple, sweet, and they are still sitting because it's easier than read a book. It's easier to do something. So technical solutions are very easy, and they will always be for us very attractive. And then looking how did we survive until now, and we have. It's again, we are going very deep in the history of us. I think religion. Till 300 years ago, till Enlightenment, didn't give us any choice. Was forcing us to do this or that, and never promised us easy life. The technology is promising us easy life, solution for everything. Our main religion today is comfort. Everything should be very comfortable. And if we would do this thousands of years ago, probably we will come back to monkey. Because we are not just growing by using comfort and comfort. And many examples of this show how also children automatically, not all, but 80%, it's enough, use comfortable decisions. So when we speak about tech industry, of course, they are, we can blame them for many things, but we have also to take our own responsible for what we are doing every day, as we spoke. Yeah, and all the time we have to remember that even when we ask them for feedbacks, usually you have to do it by yourself. We don't do it, and step by step, we are losing what we trained through thousands of years. So what I wanted to also add, what we didn't discuss here, demographic collapse, based because, again, of the same thing, easy solutions, comfort. To be parents is very uncomfortable. But religion and traditional values didn't give us any choice. Religion in reality gave us meaning of life was to create a family, to continue your family. Doesn't matter how hard it is. And maybe you will be rewarded in heaven, but at least you will be rewarded by the better future of your children. So today we don't have any religion who is pushing us to have children, and everybody is free. So I don't want to make life more complicated, but we have to be realistic and responsible to think what is the result of it. And the result of it is that the country like South Korea, I call it already South Korean demographical syndrome, has no children practically, and in the best case scenario, they have 100 years where South Korea will disappear. Best case scenario, it means if they will continue to live how they live now. But I think that for not having children is changing us. You know, everything what we have in our, also as children, but also as adults, we are training ourselves to say no to something, to say no to too much sugar, but we cannot many times, and so we have diabetes, and this to say no. So in digital world, of course, much less no, everything is easy, and now we have South Korean society, which digitalized much quicker than us. Today, not only that they don't have children, why I think they have less than 100 years? Because they cannot die peacefully in this situation. And it's already growing. The big conflict between men and women. You can look in, of course, in Google, in internet, what is going on in South Korea today. And I had a break. I was on together with Mike on a lunch on Monday, and there was a company, one big German company for reproduction, and they were just sharing demographical research what they are doing. We, in the global world, if everything will go peacefully, have 500 years. But I don't believe that it will go peacefully, because we will lose our ability to speak with each other, to care for each other. And this is something we can call it demographical or cultural, but it is very important. So I think this is, we spoke mainly it's technology, how to stop them, how to regulate them. But I think if we will not start to speak about meaning of life, how we can replace it, we lost it, finish. And the numbers for young people just confirm it. That the majority of children, of young adults today, 20 years old, if you just ask them very deeply, they have no enough strength or conviction to have family with children. It means they will have not it. Comfort became too strong, and they, as we heard from our experts, not on this, they just didn't develop enough neurons, somewhere cells, which are responsible for it. So we cannot even blame them anymore. They are gone. So we have to think about it. So this is, and now I'm coming to the end. And to the end, it means I ask already some people, and I remind all of us again, as pragmatical people here, let's say to ourselves, kind of like it's the word obligation is too strong, but like a pledge, 10 people. Let's make a list. With these 10 people, our friends, we will share the knowledge that we heard here today. We ask them to look at the human change for YouTubes to see this panel. And this, when we will speak with these 10 people, we will ask if it's possible for them to share it with their other 10 people. And this will be already, maybe we will start it like that. If we cannot wait for regulation. And maybe Mike is right, maybe they will come in 10 years, maybe earlier, we don't know. But at least we are already here. If we'll start to calculate 10, 10, 10, it could be start of something. Thank you very much for your big attention, for coming here, for sharing our worries. I have to say, probably most of the here people are already convinced. We have to also to reach somehow people who are not convinced, to make them part of our club. So again, thank you very much. And of course, again, the main thank is to our team, because we will see them in YouTube's. So many people will see you and will learn so much. Thank you very much.
And Margarita, I just want to say, on behalf of all of us, on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you for hosting this week. This house, this week in Davos, has been a center of incredible talks, and it's your generosity and your commitment that is in charge of that. So thank you.